Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Super excited to have another one of our emerging technology webinars. This is a part of a series here at Elevity that we're doing around some of our emerging ecosystem partners. And so excited to have Varonis here with us today with, I think, a really important topic with people working from home more often and how much people are leveraging the cloud for productivity, which is fantastic. There's also, as always in IT, the security side to this. And Varonis has been a good partner of the Gordon Flesch Company for a number of years and met them as a part of the merger. And our solutions architects took a look at the technology, and I think this is a really exciting opportunity for some of our customers and prospects who are joining us this morning to take a look. So thanks for taking some time and joining us today. So by way of introductions here quick, can move on to the intro slide. My name is Paul Hager. I'm the Director of Solutions here at Elevity. It's my role to help lead our Emerging Solutions Committee and evaluate new technologies that become a part of either our mid-market program for our customers that have over 100 users that are up, or a part of our fully managed program for our managed clients. And I lead that solution architect group here. And like I said at the top, had a chance to meet Varonis and take a look at this technology, something that we use ourselves every day to secure our data. And really excited to have Chris here to join us and walk us through a little bit about the Varonis platform and solution. Some of the housekeeping things before I invite Chris to take over is, just as always, we're recording the webinar and can share the content with folks that want to share it with colleagues that happen to miss it today. There is an entry for a gift card at the end. So you have to make it through the end of the presentation, and the final slide will show as a link to a quick survey. When you fill out that survey, then you are entered to win that gift card at random. So hang on for that. As always, please, if you have questions, throw them into the Q&A here within Zoom, and we'll get to those questions at the end or kind of as we go here. Knowing that, people on this call might be in different points in their technology journey. You might be a smaller business or a large organization. There are different parts of the Verona stack that are more appropriate for different sized businesses. So as always, if something here kind of gets you excited or concerned about security, then you want to talk to a trusted advisor, reach out to your account manager within Elevity or myself, and we'll get you connected to the right team and find you the right Varonis person and the right technology to help solve your business challenge. So with that, enough introductions, let's get into it, and excited to have some PowerPoint and some live demo. Is always great to see. So Chris, thanks for joining us this morning, and thanks for getting this presentation together from our group here.
Thank you, Paul. I really do appreciate the time and welcome everybody. Just today, it's going to be a quick overview of what Varonis actually focuses on for organizations of all sizes. And then we will get into the fun stuff or the scary stuff, I guess, depending on your approach and your view around the topic. So just to get started, a little bit about Varonis. Our focus, since we were created about 16 years ago now, has really always been around the critical data and the infrastructure associated with that. And when we're talking about critical data, we're talking about your unstructured data stores. So originally starting with Windows, Unix, SharePoint, Exchange, NAS devices, we want to make sure that we understand what is actually going on out there. And today we're going to really focus on O365 and then using that as a vector to break into environments. So we're going to use a man-in-the-middle attack. We're also going to look at the infrastructure that sits behind here. So Microsoft Teams, VPN, DNS, web traffic, and Active Directory, as these are basically the keys to the kingdom in the remote workforce world. And that is going to be a big focus of how we're looking at today's presentation, as well as the attack, is that the remote workforce is here to stay. We know that that's actually the case. And there are questions that come from every business, no matter what your industry actually is, around your unstructured data and what's actually going on. So what kind of questions are we talking about in that situation? Well, the first questions that we always tend to ask is my data at risk? So what kind of data is sitting out there? What kind of data is exposed? Is there a way to actually allow the business to keep working without actually impacting it? In the event of a breach, which is going to be a big focus for today, is what exactly is everybody working on? How exactly are we working through the very sophisticated types of attacks that do come in? Everybody that can read the news understands what's going on there. But then ultimately, how do you stop that? How do you understand the impact of what is actually going on? And along with all of this is compliance, right? So compliance as a whole in today's day and age is focusing heavily actually on these, all these areas. The understanding that you have to know who has access to what kind of data, how they're accessing it, and what actually is happening with all of that access, and should it be removed in the long run to reduce the impact of a breach. So that being said, Varonis obviously steps into the middle of this. Our focus on those enterprise data stores and the infrastructure behind it, along with those use cases, creates what's known as the Varonis Data Security Platform. It's a metadata warehouse that focuses on gathering all of the user information and groups, the permissions associated with them, and then the activity around what it is that they're working with on the data. But not only that, what kind of data it is that they're working with, and then ultimately, where are they coming from? Those types of answers and use cases that have to be answered at all time are big points for every organization, because if you can do that, you can help your entire workforce continue to work without impacting the business. So we alluded to it earlier that the remote workforce is the biggest thing that's happening right now. In the COVID age, we understand that everybody is able to work remotely. Now, not necessarily from secured devices on secured networks, but we know that collaboration is key. So things like O365 and Teams have really actually grown to become just a simple part of business. It doesn't matter where you sit within the organization. You have to be able to use those because that's how we communicate. That's how we work together. The side effect, though, is that security has really stepped backwards as a result. And then the tiny piece that no one seems to think about is that data is moving off of data stores that were controlled, and it's being stored in brand new areas. OneDrive, SharePoint Online, it is being dropped off into Teams, into private channels, or into collaboration chats. We know that those things all exist now. So when we're taking a look at all of that, how do we make sure that everybody is doing everything correctly? And what kind of risks should the organizations be thinking about as they go through each of these, right? Varonis is not excluded from this. We think about this all the time. So this is what you have to think about each time you work through this. Looking at where the data sits, looking at who has access to it, looking at how the information is being accessed from where, you have to be able to understand that. Those sensitive data stores that you think are locked down and that are under control, maybe they're sitting inside of databases or wherever else it is, are being pulled off for easier access on a OneDrive site, or maybe it's SharePoint Online. The data is being shared dramatically with that quick and easy share button in the upper right-hand corner of every document. And now it's being exposed and possibly compromised. And then overall IT teams really do become overwhelmed. And then as a result, attacks tend to become more successful. You can read the news, you can see all of the latest, even the most advanced security organizations can show where something like this would happen. We're going to leave names off at this point. And some of the simplest things that you thought were locked down have been opened up just because it's easier for the business to work. Here's just a great example of that. The remote desktop port, it's pretty well controlled, or so you thought. Over the last year, the RDP exposure actually went up close to 40% across all industries. It's pretty simple to see this, right? There's a link in here where you'll be able to click on this and actually go through this. This is something that actually happens regularly. In fact, we see it almost all the time in organizations that ask us to come in and take a look at what's actually happening. So now that we understand just what is actually going on and all of the risk associated with it, what is it that Varonis does that makes us different than everybody else? And how do we help control all of that throughout the entire environment when it comes to unstructured data? The first step for us is the ability to collect all of the information. We say that we collect billions of events here, but in reality, it actually gets into tens of billions of events in a lot of situations, because what's actually happening is we're pulling in as much data as we possibly can. We want to see all of the ability to access data. We want to see every area that the business is working in and how people are coming into the environment. We need to be able to see everything that's happening in O365. So no matter where it's being accessed from, no matter who is actually working with it, we want to be able to pull that data. But it's not just being able to pull all the information, right? We have to normalize it. We have to create a consistent structure around it. And then we have to ultimately aggregate that together to create a feasible piece of information. So here's an example of what a standardized event might actually look like. We're looking at the data. We can see along the lines of the person that did it, what type of file they worked with, where they accessed it, and where they came from while doing it, along with the time frame that they normally worked in. You miss some information though, right? You're missing some context here because this all seems just like a normal event, right? But you don't have the answers to say, is this where they normally access information from? Is it, what type of data is this? Who is this user to begin with? In any organization, regardless of size, a lot of these questions are actually really, really hard to answer. So what if we could enrich them? What if we could take additional information, map them all out, and actually be able to tell you a lot more? Something like this, where we can see that, in this case, David Johnson is an executive. The type of information he's working with contains sensitive information to the business. The IP address that he normally signs in from is tied to a device. That's a basic, simple concept that sits out there. And he normally works in Canada. That's fine. These are all well and good. But what if you had to be able to answer these questions? What if somebody came to you and said, hey, what is it that this person is working with? How does that compare to his peers? How can I answer what type of information that he is touching all the time? And when does he normally work? Well, what if we could do that too? So we went from collection to enrichment, and now we're learning about how users interact with data. By doing this, it allows us to understand more about how something will happen in the event of a breach. What is the impact of that? How can you investigate faster? How can you alert on those types of pieces of information that are sitting out there? So by building out a baseline and doing this automatically, when I say automatically, I really do mean automatically. You simply enable the system to work. And we turn this on and we begin to build out these profiles through AI and basic machine learning concepts that have been going on for years for us to understand that this is somebody that is logging in as if they are David Johnson in this case, but they're doing it from a new location, from a different device, as well as touching data that they've never touched before. That's interesting. That makes things much more convenient for us to understand and then ultimately investigate faster. If you can understand that, you don't have to worry about the scenario that we're going to walk through, which is the man-in-the-middle attack, because events start to flow for us. We start to understand a lot more about what is actually going on, the types of data that he normally works with, the type of information that is sitting out there that his peers normally work with, as well as when he normally touches it, now becomes just a thing that you just see inside of a contact page. All of that is so crucial with how all of today's latest attacks are actually working. So let's get into what it is that everybody is hopefully here for, right? The attack lab, using multi-factor authentication to actually go around O365's built-in security. The way that we do this, right, is using two-factor authentication, stepping in the middle, and understanding what's actually going on. Well, so keeping in mind, when I say stepping in the middle, it's a lot easier than you think it is, because what's going to happen here is you'll see that attackers have the ability to step into the middle of a communication stream that is supposed to be protected to capture the information. We're actually going to go through each step of the way and understand what it is that happens here. So this is the actual scenario. We're going to start in O365 and use a basic phishing attack. We're going to take over a single O365 account. We're going to, once we get in there, we're going to proliferate. This is like a virus. No pun intended there, but this is just like a virus. We want you to understand what's actually going on and then take as many people with us as we possibly can. Once we understand that, we're now going to start jumping around and understand where that sensitive data sits and look to safely get it out of the environment. It sounds ironic to think that we're going to safely exfiltrate data, but that's actually a huge part of how all of these attacks actually occur. So how does it all start? 0365, you receive a standardized phishing email. This tends to be how almost all of these start. No one is immune to these. These become much, much, much more effective as we move along. Even within our own organization, there are ways to hit buttons that personally affect someone to allow them to click on these links. They don't look at where the information is coming from. They just simply think that this makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that we've seen recently is that if somebody's in here and further along in these processes, they can go back and look at other strings that have already been sent and piggyback off of those to send an email that looks like it's legit. That looks like it's coming from someone that we should be able to see. You'll see what that actually looks like shortly. So what actually happens here? That victim receives a phishing email. They click on the link and congratulations, they're taken to a page that looks just like the Microsoft sign-in site. To an attacker, they actually see everything that's going on the machine because they control that site. They can see the username and the password, and then from there, they can actually intercept the traffic and send it off to O365's cloud server, which in turn sends back a 2FA site, right? There's that little link. There it shows up. There's the code that you just simply type in. What happens though is that because you're typing it back into that phishing page, that code comes to the attacker and the cloud server takes over. The attacking machine now actually has the cookie that sits inside of it, and they will simply use Google Chrome to actually navigate through and gather that same information using something that has been pre-authenticated to access the cloud server as the victim. It's a pretty simple process. And when I show you how fast it actually is to be able to do this, I think everyone probably will, their jaws will drop at this point. The way this works looks just like this. Keep in mind, I'm not going to be typing any of this. This is actually pre-recorded in this way, but if there's questions on how this actually works, we can answer those at the end. Here's how it will look to your victim. Everything about this looks normal, right? Your Microsoft page, look at that's simple, it's easy. Here's my information, here's my outlook.com information. I'm going to type in the password. But what stands out here? It's the URL. The URL looks normal because I'm only reading the first few pieces of that. Hey, everything looks fine, except for it's at this thing called nofish.com. That doesn't make any sense. This is where we all fall subject to an attack, where that phishing email can maybe step in. We're not paying attention to the tiny details that sit out there because this looks legit. We've all seen this page before. If you're using O365 in your personal or professional life, this looks clear and easy. What ends up happening is there's your credentials, you enter the request in, and this is what happens, right? The victim authenticates and they're redirected and sent off to a linked document. That's interesting. Here you go. This seems normal. Everything seems legit. I actually got taken to my normal live page. What you don't understand behind the scenes is that because those credentials have already been stolen, yes, fine, you can keep working, but you've already granted the keys to the kingdom to that attacker. This is what the attacker is going to see though. The attacker has that connection. You've clicked on that link. There's the username. There's the password. We've captured the tokens. We know what the IP address is and we know the time. Once we've done that, then that 2FA token comes in. They enter that into that same spoofed page, and congratulations, you now have that authentication cookie, which is what is highlighted on the screen. By stealing that cookie, with a quick copy, they can go into Google Chrome, open that up, insert the cookie itself, and they now actually have direct access to the page as a whole. Because once they click on that, they're inside of the Outlook client. They can connect in. There's the email. What's going to actually happen now? It's time to proliferate. There's the email that they actually sent to themselves and they phished it. Now they have access to it. Let's figure out more. Let's start diving into what's actually sitting out here. I have access to this person's direct mailbox, which means I have access to all of the same resources sitting in O365. So the first place I'm going to look for is I'm going to take a document that I've already pre-coded I crafted a macro inside of it. It's going to display that nice, beautiful yellow bar that says enable macros on it. I'm going to put it out on a test on my SharePoint Online site. And then, you know what? I'm going to take a guess. I'm going to type in managers. Maybe I could type in executives. Maybe I could type in whatever I feel like and send off a quick invite, shared link to somebody, but it's going to come from my account. It's going to come from out where I want to see. So by doing that, it's out there and everybody now gets an email that looks just like this. How simple was that? Nothing looks wrong because in the remote workforce, this happens every single day, probably tens, if not hundreds of times within organizations, because what you're sitting there thinking about is the idea of, oh yeah, there's that document that we were looking for. Well, that's the update that I was waiting to see. Everyone just simply reads this. They say, this came from a trusted person. Here's that document that they were going to send to me, or here's a new one that I wanted to work on. They click on the link, they open it up, they enable editing, they enable the content, and congratulations. Malware is now there. Every person that does that, they're victim. So remember that going all the way back now, this started with a simple phishing email and what looked like normal pages to log into. And one account gets compromised. And frankly, that person probably is actually still just working and doing their normal job. They don't even think anything of it because they got redirected back to an Outlook site, went and started working in SharePoint, and they're doing their job. There's nothing that says that you can't have the same user account signing in. Behind the scenes, though, all the rest of the people have become victim to this. So congratulations, I can now connect in to what's known as a command and control server. Once I have that, the attacker now has access to everything. They can see all of the credentials being typed. They can see all of the directories that are going through there, and they can just sit and wait. There's nothing that says that they can. There's nothing that says that they must hurry at this point in time. All they're doing is seeing where these people are signing in, what types of data they're going out and looking at. Now, let's say the attacker, though, really starts getting anxious. They start to say, you know what, it's time to come in. It's time to start taking these files. The low and slow effect can be anywhere from several days to several months for how long they're sitting in there gathering this information and proliferating themselves to get access to new areas. But once they have the credentials that they're hoping to find, maybe it's a service account, maybe it's an exec or an admin account that they're hoping to capture the information for, they can just simply sign in. Well, what do you mean when we say sign in? Well, I want to just go out and find all the files that are needed. Well, what do we need from this perspective? Well, I have the backup service account. The backup service account has full access to the entire NAS device that's sitting out here. So I moved from O365 to an email account, SharePoint Online, and now I'm looking at the on-prem data. Simple thing known as file crawler sits out there and it works inside of the system. I can just type in whatever it is that I'm looking for and I will find a word inside of all these documents. And I can just sit. This thing can just crawl. The information here flew through because it was controlled. Maybe this takes several days. Nothing's going to stop this thing from not working. It's literally just crawling through documents to find out what's actually sitting out there. Just looking at this, I can tell this has sensitive data. I don't need anything special to know that there's sensitive data sitting inside of here. This is the finance directory. It contains all of the critical financial information for the customers, the dates and times. It looks like old data from 2018. Does this even matter anymore? How about the full list of customers? What could I gain from that? A new attack vector? Maybe there's a new piece of financial information that's going to make a big difference. Once I have this, though, I want to get this out of here. How do I make sure that I can get this out of the environment? How do I make sure that something seems like it makes a lot of sense? I'm just going to put it in a zip file. It's simple. I'm just going to put this out here. I'm going to grab all this information and I'm going to put it inside of a quick file. I don't need a password on it, but I'm just going to put the default on that one. And then because I don't necessarily know that I want to go through the email send it off to somebody else. I want to send this through maybe webmail in this case. How about a Gmail account? Signing into a Gmail account that's disposable, doesn't really matter where that came from. Obviously a little bit of Star Wars humor for us in this case, but here's that private.zip document, and I'm going to put it on there and I'm going to send it off to the whole set of people that I want to have this sent to. This whole time, we've been paying attention to what's going on behind the scenes, we being Varonis. Now, that said, it doesn't look like anybody else that was doing anything wrong during this time period. Everybody was working through all the data. They were normally interacting with information. They didn't know that their admin accounts maybe were taking over, or that they have an A account, or if they're an executive, that they have even more access than they probably needed to. So what do we do about that? What actually happens in these situations? Because really, the business was continuing to work as if nothing was wrong. This is what it looks like inside of our alerting capabilities. Because we're paying attention with that metadata warehouse, I can see right away the types of mailboxes that are being worked with. How did an admin sign in to an account that it did have access to for a mailbox, but that it's never actually used before? How did it sign in for a brand new geolocation? A lot of this is actually happening from the idea that there's an attacker's workstation that's sitting in place, but they're using a proxy to gather that information, and they're coming from a different location, someplace around the globe. Well, if you know that they're coming from some places you don't do business in, you're going to get an alert for that, especially if you're going out and touching something like SharePoint Online or OneDrive. How can I know if something was maybe downloaded that wasn't supposed to be downloaded correctly from anybody? Well, let me fire off an alert for this. All of this is just pre-built into Varonis. We already know what's actually going on behind the scenes for this, but then we can gather additional pieces of information like what you see on the screen. If we know how people normally interact with data, we know what type of data that is that they work with, if there's sensitive information associated with it, how they're interacting to get into and out of the organization. Maybe it's time that we actually fire off some of these alerts, and they're already there. You don't have to worry about anything. You don't have to tune anything. Everything is set so that once you're in the system and we have an understanding of where people are coming in, how they're working with data, where they're authenticating from, what type of data it is that they're touching, all of this is just ready, and it begins to build out all of that information. These are our superpowers, right? This is what makes us different, that we're not looking for a specific type of action, just one, because those change all the time. We're not looking for a specific signature. We're not looking for anything along those lines. We're literally looking at how people work with information in your organization. And we call it the most critical information. It's not just us, it's Gartner, it's Forrester. The critical information that frankly is just sitting out there for the world to work with. It's the data that's sitting in Windows. It's the data that's sitting in O365. It's the data that sits on these NAS devices. In the example that we showed you, data from 2018 is still sitting there. It may still be viable to the business, but frankly, it's wide open to more people than it needs to be open to. So if we can show you an attack from how somebody came in to how they actually left and everything in the middle, that's something that's really important. But we need to be able to alert you on that. We need you to be able to understand what's actually going on. We need to correlate the information so that you can stop that from happening. But ultimately, prepare better, right? Be proactive in your approach. Understand that we can do correlation between all of the data streams. All of that's actually just being done behind the scenes. It really helps us key in on the overall suspicious behavior and add that context, the visibility that we need to have to be the case. Along with a partner like Elevity, we want to make sure that everybody understands what's actually going on. We want to be able to understand everything that's happening in your environment with as little interaction from you as possible, and then empower you with even more help. Part of what we do is provide an incident response team. It's just built into what it is that we have. We want to make sure that we understand what is happening, and if you're nervous about something, we'll help you investigate. We want to give you the additional security in O365 and Teams. Get the ability to understand what data is being worked with from where, and how did it make its way there? Could we lock it down? Should it even exist? Understand how people are working inside of your environment, how they're coming in from their homes, from places in the public. wherever it is, to understand, does this make sense or not? And then ultimately give more direct visibility into Active Directory to be able to say, these are the types of accounts, what they have access to. Is it too much? Can we answer all of that along the way? We're here for every organization. We want to be able to answer these questions for everyone. The biggest thing for us, again, is understanding that these are our superpowers. These are the things that we hope to have for everyone along the way. With that said, that's the end of the demo. That's the end of the presentation. So, questions?
Great, thanks, Chris. Really interesting presentation, and I think an interesting moment of realization for folks that phishing page can extend to the two-factor request as well, and that attackers are able to use that, in real time. What are some examples that you have seen? I'm sure you're involved in its response all the time. What are some things that you have seen here in, our local market in Wisconsin and the Midwest that have led to some bad days similar to this?
Yeah, that's a great question, Paul. I can provide two great examples. Right now, I brought up the RDP session literally because an organization that we're working with said, well, we want to try this. We want to see what's going on. And we ended up finding out that they have a number of workstations that they've opened up for RDP connection for easier access for their users. And congratulations, they were literally under an attack while working with us. So that was a scary one for everyone. We didn't think that was actually going to, we didn't think that really still existed. And in the last 2 weeks, that has shown up. And the more interesting one is the idea that the quickness that organizations can see information with Varonis is never highlighted more than with an existing customer that maybe tries something new within the Varonis suite of products. And we take a look, and we will literally turn on a switch, and they will call within a few hours and say, hey, it doesn't look like something's right. There's an alert already showing up. And it's simply because somebody wasn't looking at an area, and we turned on to find out, yeah, that person just put their 2-week notice in, and we don't know what's going on. We don't really see what they're doing. And all of a sudden they just start seeing alerts happening repeatedly for them. And you find out that it's an insider. It's not necessarily even on the outside, but the inside, where somebody is picking up their data and they're walking out the door and they're calling it, quote unquote, their data. There's no such thing as their data. It's the company's data. You shouldn't be walking out the door with that. So those are two examples that we see on a pretty regular basis. The phishing is honestly almost every installation that we do from a POC perspective will show up in some manner where somebody accidentally clicked on that link. And again, I've used Varonis a few times as examples, but phishing attacks are actually really, really easy to manufacture for most organizations. So.
And maybe for some of the folks that are on here, Varonis is an enterprise feature set solution, runs as virtual machines inside of meant to run in a virtual environment. There might be some smaller organizations on this call. What kind of offerings do you have that kind of run the gamut, or don't you have for given size organizations, just so that we're kind of upfront and transparent with people who might be excited about this?
Yeah, definitely. So in reality, everything that we do, no matter the size of the organization, is set up. So we want to set up and connect inside of anyone's environment and look at the data stores that we listed off there. So Windows servers, Unix, Linux, SharePoint, Exchange, O365, anybody that's using Teams, right? We want to make sure that that's understood as well. Again, no limit on this, right? The idea being that once we step in and we do take a look, all we ever ask for is just a little bit of time to be able to show you just how quickly we identify the sensitive data. We're auditing all the information and what you may be interested in seeing when it comes to that facet. Again, no limit on that size. We really want to keep focused on the idea that we're providing additional insight and context to a lot of organizations.
Great. Seems like we have a question that came in. If they get in, what can you do? And why shouldn't we focus on trying to keep them out to start with?
Sure. we didn't hit on what we can do, and the focus on trying to keep them out to start with is actually exactly where we want to stay focused. So what can we do if somebody does get in, right? The biggest thing for us is alerting as soon as possible, as soon as we see that anomalous behavior along the way. So identifying if signing in from a new location, such as monitoring the VPN or the O365 access. Our alerting capabilities don't just simply alert, they integrate with common SIMs. They also have the ability to integrate with PowerShell. PowerShell being the #1 tool for most hackers along the way. We want to be able to stop them along in that process too. So disabling that account or knocking off the NIC card inside of the device, anything along those lines can be enacted as soon as an alert fires that you're not comfortable with. That's something that we would do immediately, and we do for every one of our customers. Why shouldn't you focus on trying to keep them out to start with is actually the same question that I tend to ask everyone along the way too, because operationally that just makes the most sense. Why not be proactive? Which is where Varonis, we step in to say, this is where every account has access to data. Should that be the case? And then work backwards from there. Maybe look to integrate with something like a PAM solution or an ITSM solution to say, let's focus on why these accounts should be checked out of a vault or looked at from a different angle. We want to be able to provide that information so that you don't have to react, so that you only have the accounts that have appropriate access set in that situation. We call it the least privilege model. I think it's pretty much a generic security practice, but it's something that we want to make sure is existing out there all. So we really want to focus on that as well, because frankly, if you get to a point where Varonis is firing, something was probably misfiring or not firing the entire time. So.
Sure. For some of those in the call, ITSM, kind of referring to your ticket management, your IT management system that you might have, which may be, outsourced to an organization like us, where we're managing some of those tickets for you, or for your internal team, or can go to both at the same time, as we often do for critical security data and alerts for our customers' environments that we're managing or co-managing with the customer.
Exactly.
Any other questions from the group? If not, appreciate everyone who joined us this morning. I think really interesting content and food for thought. And for those that are interested in learning more, talking more about this this offering and other security offerings that we have to protect people in this work from home state, fill out our little survey, which is the next slide. Here we go. So we'll email the recording and the demo link. But if you complete the survey, you've entered to win that $100 Amazon gift card. So quick little form, won't take you more than 2 minutes, but just want to make sure you are here and with us. And also if there's any follow-up things that we can do, that we get your contact info so we can get back to you right away. But Chris, again, appreciate you and the entire Varonis team for partnering up with us as a part of our Merging Solutions webinar series here, and for providing the content today. I think really interesting and terrifying, and a reminder that there's always going to be new ways for attackers to get in. And I think this AI approach to profiling and understanding the data and watching behaviors is really one of the critical next steps on a layered approach to security. So really appreciate it.
No, and we thank everyone for your time in Elevity. Thank you for having us and allowing us to speak today.
Great. Give people a few more seconds to scan that code or go to the link. But otherwise, thanks everybody for joining. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone.